Amara Adeyemi did not cry when her husband abandoned her at her father's burial. She was standing beside the open grave, one hand still resting on the polished wood of the coffin, when Desmond Cole turned away from her like she was a delay in his schedule instead of his wife. He did not offer his hand. He did not ask if she was all right. He did not even wait for the last prayer to end before he took Shania Okiki by the wrist and led her toward the black Range Rover parked beneath the acacia trees. Amara watched it happen in silence. Her mother-in-law, Mabel Cole, looked Amara up and down with the kind of disgust that only small-hearted people carry with confidence. Then, with a lazy flick of her wrist, Mabel tossed Amara's handbag onto the dusty ground. The clasp snapped open. Her phone fell out. A small bottle of hand cream rolled toward the grave, and the folded indigo cloth pouch her father had pressed into her palm 3 days before he died slid halfway into the red soil. Nobody moved to help her. Not her husband. Not the woman wearing perfume to a burial. Not the mother who had spent 4 years reminding her that she was never good enough for the Cole family. The only sound was the wind moving through the dry grass and the low, shuddering breath of an old woman in the back row who still believed funerals were sacred places. Desmond opened the passenger door for Shania. Shania lowered herself into the seat slowly, carefully, like a queen stepping into a chariot. Then she adjusted her sunglasses and glanced once at Amara. Not with pity, with victory. Mabel climbed into the back seat. Desmond got behind the wheel. Amara took 1 step forward. Desmond. He looked at her through the half-open window like he was doing her a favor. "There's no space," he said. Amara stared at the empty seat beside Mabel. He did not blink. "Call someone from your village," Mabel said from the back. "Or better yet, stay here and mourn properly for once." Then the window slid up. The engine started, and the car rolled away, tires grinding over the same earth that held Amara's father. She stood there, in a plain black dress she had stitched herself 2 years ago, dust rising around her ankles, the burial still unfinished behind her. And something inside her went still. Not broken. Still. The kind of stillness that comes when pain is so complete it stops asking to be noticed. She knelt slowly and picked up the indigo pouch before the dirt could stain it further. It was soft from age, tied with a faded gold cord, and light enough that anyone careless would think it meant nothing. But Chief Bamidele Adeyemi had placed it in her hand with trembling fingers and one final instruction. Do not open it until people reveal their true hearts. At the time, Amara had nodded through tears and told him not to speak like that. Now, standing over his grave while her husband drove away with another woman, she finally understood what her father had meant. Across the burial ground, beneath the shade of a white canopy, a man in a charcoal suit watched everything. He did not interrupt. He did not interfere. He simply observed with the patience of a man who had been entrusted with a truth too large to reveal too soon. His name was Barrister Tayo Adebayo. He had served the Adeyemi family for 24 years, and the scene in front of him had answered the last question he needed answered. He took out his phone and made a single call. "It is time," he said. To understand why Amara Adeyemi was left standing alone at her father's burial, you have to go back long before Desmond Cole ever entered her life. You have to go back to a quiet compound on the outskirts of Ibadan, where a girl with bright eyes and careful hands grew up believing her father was nothing more than a disciplined old mechanic who loved books, silence, and boiled groundnuts on Sunday evenings. That was the story Bamidele Adeyemi allowed the world to believe. The neighborhood knew him as a dignified widower who drove an aging Peugeot, wore neatly pressed caftans that had been mended more than once, and fixed broken things without charging people when he knew they couldn't afford it. If a widow's roof leaked, Bamidele sent someone to repair it. If a child in the area needed school fees, the money somehow appeared through anonymous church support. If a market woman lost her husband, groceries would begin arriving at her doorstep every Friday until she found her footing again. No one asked too many questions, because Bamidele was the kind of man who answered with a smile and then changed the subject. But the truth was bigger than the town could imagine. Chief Bamidele Adeyemi was the hidden founder of Adeyemi Meridian Group, a private empire spread across ports, logistics, copper, shipping, telecom infrastructure, and agricultural land from Lagos to Durban, from Accra to Nairobi. His businesses moved goods through half the continent. His ships crossed oceans. His warehouses sat behind gates in cities Amara had only ever seen in atlases and old documentaries her father loved. Yet his name appeared nowhere publicly. He used holding companies, private trusts, international counsel, and iron discipline to keep his identity buried beneath layers of silence. He had not hidden his wealth out of fear. He had hidden it out of conviction. Bamidele had grown up poor enough to know what hunger smelled like before dawn. He had watched brothers fight over inheritance before the body was cold. He had watched daughters become bargaining chips the moment men discovered what their fathers owned. And when Amara was born after 12 years of waiting, he made a decision that shocked every advisor around him. His daughter would know education before luxury, character before inheritance, work before access, love before power. So Amara was raised in simplicity, not deprivation, simplicity. She read novels by torchlight during rainy season blackouts. She learned how to wash school uniforms by hand. She sold homemade chin-chin at church fundraisers. She volunteered at a shelter for abandoned women. She accompanied her father to villages where he quietly funded wells and classroom blocks, though she never knew the money came from him. Read this in a slightly fast, cinematic storytelling style with minimal pauses. What she knew was this: her father never lied to her about what mattered. He told her that money magnifies character, that hunger reveals people, that shame can teach you more about a man than celebration ever will, and that one day the world would try to tell her who she was worth. "When that day comes," he said once, touching the indigo pouch locked inside his bedside drawer, "do not let the world speak before your blood does." Amara never forgot those words. She just did not understand them until much later. She met Desmond Cole in her final year at university in Lagos. He was handsome in the polished way some men practice in mirrors. He wore ambition like cologne. He spoke fast, laughed loudly, and carried himself with the restless energy of a man who wanted to be seen entering every room. Amara had spent most of her life around quiet men. Desmond felt exciting. He talked about building a future, about leaving average people behind, about becoming one of the names that opened doors in boardrooms and embassy lounges. He said he admired Amara's calm spirit. He said she grounded him. He said her softness made him want to become better. And because young women are sometimes kind enough to mistake performance for depth, she believed him. Bamidele met Desmond only 3 times before the wedding. He was courteous every time, but after the last visit, he asked Amara a question that made her laugh then and ache later. Does he know how to be content? Amara smiled and said contentment was overrated. Her father looked at her for a long moment and said nothing. That silence should have warned her. Instead, she married Desmond in a modest ceremony in Lagos, with white flowers, a small choir, and promises that sounded sincere beneath church lights. Desmond smiled beautifully in wedding photographs. He knew exactly where the camera was at all times. For the first year, the cracks were small. He complained that Amara's clothes were too plain for his colleagues' wives. He said she was too reserved at office dinners. He laughed at the fact that her father still drove an old car. He called Bamidele a principled man with poor branding, like humility was a marketing flaw. Amara brushed it aside. Marriage, she told herself, required patience. Then Desmond got promoted. Not high enough to satisfy him, but high enough to feed the hunger. He became obsessed with appearances. Designer watches he could barely afford. Weekend brunches in places where people photographed ceilings before food. Loans taken to maintain a lifestyle meant to impress people, equally broke and equally pretending. He started measuring value in public reaction. If someone looked wealthy, they mattered. If someone looked modest, they did not. And because Amara did not display wealth, he began to resent what he assumed she lacked. His insults arrived dressed as advice at first. You need to look sharper. You don't understand the circles I'm trying to enter. Your background is too ordinary for the life I want. Then advice became accusation. You slow me down. You think small. I married beneath my vision. Amara would fold his shirts in silence and remind herself that anger is sometimes just fear in expensive shoes. But Desmond's fear was becoming cruelty, and cruelty grows fast when it is never challenged. Then Mabel moved in. Desmond's mother arrived with 3 suitcases, 6 framed portraits of herself in gelée, and the certainty that any house containing her son must naturally rearrange itself around her ego. Within 10 days, she had taken over the kitchen, criticized Amara's cooking, dismissed her upbringing, and started dropping remarks sharp enough to leave scars. "This house feels poor," she said once, staring at the dining table Amara had saved months to buy. Another evening she sniffed and said, "A woman who comes from nothing should at least know how to pretend better." Desmond never defended his wife. That silence said more than words. The house stopped feeling like a home and started feeling like an audience chamber, where Amara's dignity was reviewed daily and always found lacking. Then came Shania Okike. Shania joined Desmond's firm as a brand strategist with perfect makeup, expensive-looking handbags, and the supernatural ability some women possess to sense fragile male vanity from across a room. She laughed at Desmond's jokes before he reached the punchline. She praised his executive presence. She told him he was wasting himself in a mid-level role. She said his wife looked tired whenever Amara passed by the office events she was reluctantly dragged to. Desmond began working late, then dining out, then staying unavailable, then careless. He stopped hiding the messages, stopped lowering his voice on calls, stopped pretending Shania was just a colleague. The disrespect became domestic. One Saturday afternoon, Shania appeared in Amara's living room, wearing slippers from Amara's shoe rack and drinking tea from Amara's favorite mug, as if trespass were a personality trait. Mabel called her our Shania. Desmond called her company. Amara stood there, holding a tray of puff-puff she had made for guests she had not invited, and understood in one terrible flash that she was now a visitor in her own marriage. The humiliations multiplied. A bracelet Bamidele had given Amara on her 25th birthday later appeared on Shania's wrist at a corporate dinner. A silk scarf went missing from Amara's wardrobe and turned up tied around Shania's handbag. Mabel once laughed openly when Shania sat in Amara's place at the dining table and said, "At least somebody brings elegance into this house." Desmond smiled. That smile was one of the ugliest things Amara had ever seen. Her father noticed the change in her before she admitted anything. Bamidele had a gift for recognizing pain that had learned not to speak. He asked few questions. He listened carefully. And when she finally said, "Maybe I am not enough for the life he wants," her father looked almost offended by the sentence. "Do not confuse a man's greed with your inadequacy," he told her. She wanted to believe him. But daily humiliation is a slow poison. It weakens your voice first, then your certainty, then your memory of who you were before someone began reducing you. Months passed. Then Bamidele fell ill. It was pancreatic cancer. Aggressive, cruel, too advanced when they found it. Amara drove between Lagos and Ibadan until the road felt stitched into her bones. She sat beside his bed, reading poetry, newsprint, scripture, shipping reports he never explained, and old folk tales from a book with a torn blue cover he had kept since she was a child. Desmond visited once. Only once. He stood near the door for 12 minutes, checked his phone 4 times, and later complained in the car that the house smelled like medicine and old age. Mabel called the illness an expensive dying process. Shania asked whether Bamidele owned any land worth selling. Amara heard all of it. She said nothing. Because when life is already tearing your heart in two, sometimes outrage becomes a luxury.
3 days before he died, Bamidele asked everyone to leave the room except Amara and Barrister Tayo.
The afternoon sun lay across the blanket like gold cloth. His breathing was shallow, but his eyes were clear. He reached beneath his pillow and took out the indigo pouch, the same pouch she had seen hidden away for years. He placed it in her hand and closed her fingers around it. "When they stop pretending," he whispered, "open it." Amara bent over him, tears falling onto the sheet. "Baba, please don't speak like you're leaving." He smiled faintly. "I built walls around what is yours because the world respects wealth before it respects virtue. I needed you to know your soul before you knew your power." He glanced toward Tayo, who bowed his head. Then Bamidele looked back at his daughter. "No husband, no in-law, no outsider must touch what came through our blood unless your heart gives permission. Let hunger show you people first." Those were among the last complete words he ever spoke. 2 days later, Chief Bamidele Adeyemi died before dawn, while rain tapped softly against the windows and Amara held his hand until it cooled. The burial was held in Ibadan. It should have been a day of dignity. Instead, it became the day Desmond Cole buried his own future. After leaving Amara at the graveside, he drove Shania and Mabel straight to a private lunch at a hotel in Lagos, because Shania said funerals depressed her, and Mabel insisted sadness should never interfere with reservations. Amara remained behind until sunset. She sat beside the fresh mound of earth after everyone else left, dust on her hem, grief wrapped around her like a second skin. Barrister Tayo approached only when the sky had turned copper. He did not offer condolences in the ordinary way. He sat beside her on the low cement border of the burial ground and said quietly, "Your father was never a man who misread character. He hoped he was wrong. Today showed him he was not." Amara looked at the pouch in her lap, but did not open it. Not yet. For 3 days she stayed in her father's old house, not the estate, the old house. She slept in the room where the curtains still smelled faintly of camphor and sandalwood. She ate almost nothing. Desmond did not call, not once. He sent one message on the second evening. "Hope you're calming down. We need to discuss practical things when you return." Not, "How are you?" Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I was wrong." Practical things. That was when the last illusion died. On the 4th morning, Barrister Tayo arrived in a black Mercedes with no markings, accompanied by 2 women in navy suits and a driver who looked trained to notice everything. Amara let them in. Tayo placed a leather portfolio on the dining table, where Bamidele used to read newspapers and adjust his glasses at dawn. Then he spoke with the deliberate steadiness of a man opening a door that cannot be closed again. "Miss Adeyemi," he said, "your father left instructions that no transfer, disclosure, or estate unveiling should occur until your immediate family by marriage had fully revealed their posture toward you. That threshold has now been met." Amara stared at him without moving. He opened the file. What followed felt less like information and more like a thunderstorm delivered in documents. Chief Bamidele Adeyemi was the beneficial owner of Adeyemi Meridian Group. He controlled ports, inland freight corridors, rare earth mining interests, broadband infrastructure, commodity storage, and private energy contracts in 11 countries. He had structured everything through layered trusts managed from Mauritius, London, Nairobi, and Lagos. The total estimated net value after audit and debt reconciliation was $68.4 billion. Amara was the sole heir. Not partial heir, not co-beneficiary. Sole heir. All controlling rights, all voting authority, all access, all residences, all reserves, all aircraft shares, all family trusts, everything. Amara's lips parted, but no sound came out. Tayo slid a second document toward her. Per your father's instruction, no spouse acquires automatic operational or beneficial access. Prenuptial firewall trusts were activated at the time of your wedding without public disclosure. Your husband has no legal path into this estate unless you personally create one. Her hands began to shake. Tayo pushed a glass of water toward her and waited. Then he took the indigo pouch from where it sat on the table and placed it gently in front of her. I believe he meant, for now, to be the moment. Amara untied the gold cord. Inside was a brass key engraved with the Adeyemi crest, a rising sun above a river, and a folded, handwritten letter on cream paper. Her father's handwriting leaned slightly to the right, precise even in weakness. My dearest Amara, if you are reading this, then grief has met you and deception has introduced itself by name. I am sorry for the first, but not for the second. A hidden snake is more dangerous than one you can see. You may feel today that people have reduced you. They have not. They have only revealed themselves. Before I leave this earth, I need you to remember something. The wealth I built is not proof of your value. It is only a tool, placed in the hands of someone I trust. Your value was complete when you had nothing but your name, your mind, and the way you treated those beneath your notice. If the man beside you honored that, keep him. If he did not, let him stand outside what he never deserved to enter. Go to the river house. Open the Western study. On the third shelf is the red ledger. Read it, and you will understand why silence was our family armor. Live cleanly. Give wisely. Never beg for loyalty from people who feast on your humiliation. You were my greatest decision. Your father, always, Bamidele. A tear slid down Amara's face and landed on the paper. She did not wipe it away. After a long silence, she looked at Tayo and asked the only question that mattered. What do I do first? Tayo answered without hesitation. You come home. Home, it turned out, was not the old Ibadan house. Home was the river house. A hidden estate outside Abeokuta, on hundreds of acres, bordered by water, teak groves, old stone pathways, staff residences, solar fields, and a long private road lined with flame trees that Bamidele had planted the year Amara was born. When the gates opened, Amara almost asked the driver to stop, not because the place was beautiful, but because it felt impossible that her father had carried such magnitude in silence while eating roasted corn on plastic chairs and arguing cheerfully with local mechanics about spark plugs. The house itself rose in warm stone and dark glass above the riverbank. Elegant, not flashy. Powerful, not loud. It looked exactly like something Bamidele would build, a house that did not beg to be admired because it already knew what it was. Amara walked through the front doors in a daze. In the Western study, she found the red ledger. Inside were names, dates, donations, scholarship lists, land transfers, medical funds, drought relief accounts, and handwritten notes from her father explaining why every hidden structure had been built the way it was. Not to hoard, to protect. Not to dominate, to endure. Meanwhile, Desmond learned the truth in the most humiliating way possible, not from Amara, but from the internet. A financial publication broke the story first. Then business channels picked it up. Then gossip pages turned it into a spectacle. The hidden daughter of Africa's silent logistics titan, the modest wife who inherited a multi-billion-dollar empire, the burial day betrayal that insiders were already whispering about. Photos of Amara from the funeral began circulating beside grainy drone shots of the river house and old corporate filings linking shell entities back to Adeyemi Meridian Group. Desmond read the article twice, then 7 more times. Then he called Amara. The number had changed. He called Tayo. No answer. He drove to the old Ibadan house. Locked. He called Mabel into the sitting room and showed her the article with trembling hands. At first, she dismissed it as gossip. Then she saw the filings, the estate photos, the names, the dates, the legal notices. And Mabel, who had spent years treating Amara like a burden from nowhere, sat down very slowly like her knees had abandoned her. Shania reacted differently. She went pale, then practical, then opportunistic. Maybe this is good, she said. If you handle it well, maybe she forgives you. Desmond stared at her, and for the first time, he heard how ugly that sentence sounded. Not because it revealed Shania, but because it revealed him. He drove to the river house before sunrise the next day. Security did not let him through the gate. He introduced himself as Amara's husband. The voice on the intercom responded politely. Mr. Cole, you are not on the approved list. He demanded, threatened, pleaded. The gate did not move. He returned the next day with flowers, then with a handwritten apology, then with Mabel in the back seat wearing white and rehearsing tears. Nothing changed. At one point, he stood outside the gate for nearly 5 hours under unforgiving heat while passing staff vehicles ignored him with professional indifference. Inside those gates, the world had already reorganized itself around a truth he could no longer manipulate. Amara knew he was there. She was informed every time. She never came out, not from revenge, from clarity. There are some doors you do not slam. You simply stop opening them. Mabel tried churchwomen, family elders, a pastor who had once praised her cooking at a fundraiser. She told everyone there had been misunderstandings, that Amara was emotional from grief, that family matters should remain inside family. But whispers had already spread. People were talking about the burial, about the mistress, about the handbag in the dust, about the cruel comments made over the years in front of neighbors who had pretended not to hear. The same people who once overlooked Mabel's sharp tongue now found it easier to recognize evil when money exposed it. Not because wealth creates morality, but because it removes excuses. Shania lasted less than a week after the news broke. She did not want Desmond. She wanted proximity to a scent. Once she realized he was no longer a ladder, but the fool who had kicked one away, her affection dissolved like sugar in hot tea. She packed quietly, took the bracelet, left the apartment, and blocked his number. By the following weekend, she was already photographed at an event in Accra beside a divorced hotel investor with a yacht smile and a weak chin. Desmond lost more than his mistress. He lost his image. At work, people who once laughed too loudly at his jokes began falling silent when he entered rooms. Someone leaked a parking lot voicemail in which he begged Amara to let him explain. Another employee swore he had mocked her father's old car 2 months earlier. Executives do not enjoy scandals that suggest poor judgment, greed, and public embarrassment. Desmond was first sidelined, then quietly terminated, under the language companies use when they want to avoid saying karma in legal prose. He moved out of the apartment he could no longer afford. Mabel went to stay with a cousin in Port Harcourt who believed hospitality should expire after 10 days. The cousin charged her for food. The world had become strangely exact. And Amara? Amara did not rush into public revenge. That is what made it unbearable for them. She did not post cryptic quotes. She did not grant interviews about betrayal. She did not stand on television stages describing how close evil had come to touching a kingdom it could not understand. Instead, she learned. She spent months in private briefings with legal teams, infrastructure directors, logistics analysts, social impact advisors, and old executives who had served her father with near religious loyalty. Some expected a grieving daughter. What they discovered was a woman raised by Bamidele Adeyemi. She listened more than she spoke, asked sharper questions each week, read every file, visited warehouses, walked shipyards, reviewed labor complaints, audited scholarship programs, froze corrupt contracts in 2 regions, expanded maternal health funding in rural communities her father had secretly supported for years. And when she finally addressed the senior board, she did so in a simple navy dress with no diamonds, no entourage, no theatrics. "My father did not build this empire so that we could worship scale," she said. "He built it so that strength could outlive noise. We will keep what is strong. We will clean what is rotten. And nobody under this name will ever again mistake humility for weakness." The room rose in a standing ovation that lasted long enough to embarrass her. 6 months later, Adeyemi Meridian Foundation launched publicly. Its first initiatives funded girls' secondary education, widow-owned farming cooperatives, trauma recovery centers, and transport scholarships for children in river communities cut off from schools during rainy season.
The press loved the story,
but they loved the private tragedy even more. Reporters tried repeatedly to ask about Desmond Cole. Amara declined every time. Not coldly, simply, "I am here to discuss the future." That sentence did more damage than any public accusation could have done. Because refusal to dramatize pain is a kind of power people who live off spectacle can never imitate. One evening, nearly 8 months after the burial, Amara walked down to the riverbank at sunset. The water reflected copper and violet. Birdsong folded into the distance. She wore a white bubu embroidered lightly at the sleeves, the kind her father used to say made her look like peace had chosen a shape. Barrister Tayo found her there with 2 cups of tea. He handed her one and sat beside her on the carved stone bench beneath a tamarind tree. "For years," he said, "your father worried he had hidden too much from you." Amara looked out at the river. "He gave me exactly what I needed before he gave me what I owned." Tayo smiled. That was his genius. She was quiet for a while. Then she asked the question she had avoided asking aloud. Did he know Desmond would become this? Tayo took a measured sip before answering. I think he knew greed rarely improves with access. He hoped marriage would prove him wrong. But he built every structure as if it would not. Amara nodded slowly. The wind lifted the edge of her sleeve. In the distance, staff lights began warming the pathways one by one. The estate glowed without announcing itself. Like legacy. Like restraint. Like the kind of power that no longer needs witnesses. That night, Amara went into the western study alone. The indigo pouch was now framed behind glass on the far wall. Below it, mounted on a small brass plate, were words she had chosen herself. They did not know who they touched. She stood there for a long time, not thinking about the billions, not thinking about Desmond stranded outside gates he would never cross, not thinking about Shania or Mabel, or the years she spent shrinking to fit inside someone else's hunger. She thought about a man in a faded caftan who kept his nails clean, his promises cleaner, and built a kingdom so his daughter would never have to beg cruel people for tenderness. Then she smiled. A real smile. The kind that starts in the chest and reaches the face only after it passes through gratitude. Because grief was still there. It would always be there. But it no longer sat on her throat. It sat beside her now. Quiet. Bearable. Part of love's long shadow. And in that room, beneath the gaze of her father's handwriting and the silence he had turned into protection, Amara finally understood the difference between inheritance and rescue. Her father had not rescued her. He had prepared her. That was why the wealth did not ruin her. That was why betrayal did not finish her. That was why a woman left in the dust at a burial could stand months later at the center of an empire without becoming arrogant, loud, or cruel in return. She had been taught too well. Far beyond the river house walls, Desmond Cole still replayed that burial in his mind. The dust, the handbag, the window sliding shut. He used to remember it with irritation. Now he remembered it with terror. Because a man can survive losing money. He can survive losing status. Sometimes he can even survive public shame. But what he rarely survives intact is the moment he realizes he was once trusted with something priceless and treated it like inconvenience. That knowledge eats slowly. It keeps office lights on in empty flats. It turns memory into punishment. It makes apologies rot before they leave the mouth, because deep down, the man speaking knows he is not sorry for the wound. He is sorry he misjudged the worth of what he wounded. And that is not repentance. That is regret wearing borrowed clothes. Amara never returned to him. She never needed to. Some endings do not require reunion, revenge, or courtroom speeches. Some endings are complete the moment truth arrives and stays. If this story moved you, remember this. The people who mock your quiet often do so because they cannot measure value without applause. Let them misunderstand you. Let them underestimate you. Let them walk away if walking away is what exposes their hearts. Because not every kingdom looks like a throne. Sometimes it looks like discipline. Sometimes it looks like dignity. Sometimes it looks like a daughter in plain black cloth, standing alone beside a grave, not yet knowing that everyone who abandoned her had just lost access to the greatest thing they would ever touch. And sometimes, by the time they understand, the gates are already closed.